of approaches to project management that all projects basically follow, which, as long as you kind of stick to those basic principles, you can't go too far wrong. And I think, I'm hoping that the 3 sessions that we did, my one was on, the kind of initiating a project. Michael's was on the kind of next stage, which is planning a project. And then Nikki's was actually on the delivery of the project. And every project, including like this kind of celebratory one, will have those 3 stages to that project. And then it's about how you go through. And as one of the things I'll talk about again today, I think is useful this afternoon, is about as you do the transition from each of those key stages, from the initiation, the planning, and then the delivery, what do you need to make sure you do so that everybody is aware of where you are all up to, because that's important as well. And then we'll touch on change management as well, because again, where projects I think can often go awry is everyone starts off at the beginning often with a very clear idea and a very clear project plan. But inevitably during the course of a project, there are changes, aren't there, that happen. Yeah. And what can often go wrong is that if that change process isn't managed reasonably closely, and as I say, I mentioned Prince2 because that has a very, very, again, very bureaucratic, but very positive approach to how you manage changes, because it does manage them very successfully. However, any project management approach must manage change. How you do it, whether you do it kind of full on Prince2 or you might do a slightly lighter touch, but you do need to have some mechanism whereby you try to manage change processes, and you need to get the changes kind of approved, and you need to also, which sounds like kind of, common sense, because a lot of project management I think is kind of applied common sense in a way, is you need to record the changes that you're making so that you actually don't get to the point where you've made changes without knowing that you've made them, so to speak. You haven't kind of communicated them properly or made a record, because that's when projects become chaotic, because you suddenly get somebody turning up and saying, oh, I thought it was this next Wednesday, I didn't know it had been moved to Thursday afternoon, type of thing. And it's those changes that failure to kind of acknowledge, record, tell everybody and make sure everyone's on the same page can cause all kinds of chaos. And that's often what can actually cause projects to go horribly wrong. And then you get all kinds of difficulties that come from that. Okay, shall we move then? We seem to be, I'm going to keep going while I can. So that's good. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, it will keep going. And the kind of gremlins of, so this is my attempt on this next one to kind of recap what I think you've covered in what was going to be the previous 3 weeks, but was actually longer because we had a bit of a interregnum, didn't we, for Christmas and New Year. So what we covered in my session was how to initiate a project. And we talked about the fact that projects they operate within an environment, and that one of the things that often happens at the very beginning of a project is that you might, when you're doing your initial kind of project thinking about the plan for the project and what the project is, you might do things like undertake a SWOT analysis, with his strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. You might do things like a PESTEL analysis, which is looking at the political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental things that can impact on a project. And there are other planning, initiation, project tools you can use, but they're all about kind of setting the context and the kind of environment in which the project operates. Then you've got the idea of the difference between what is project, program, and portfolio management. And we talked about the fact that in some organizations, and I'm sure Bassett Law CVS is one, you don't just have one project, but you've actually got many projects operating at the same time. And what you would then sometimes want to do is what's called program management, where you will, in fact, bring the groups of projects which are similar, that are like-minded projects, and group them together and actually manage them at a kind of an upper level, above the project management level, as programs. And that's something which I think as organizations become more kind of quote unquote mature in their project management approaches, they do develop an approach that's around program management. And I know that I think I mentioned within Inspire ourselves, we're on this journey because we have got increasing numbers of projects as an organization, more and more than we've ever had. And Peter, the chief executive, and the Inspire leadership team, of which I'm a member, have kind of pulled together a kind of an approach to program management of the projects. And we've actually appointed somebody called Liz Guilford to actually act as the program manager, not the individual. Each project has its own sponsor, project manager, and kind of business as usual person. But the program manager, Liz, her job is to basically corral all of those projects together and ensure that we're taking a kind of a unified approach to how we manage the projects. And this Wednesday coming, actually, the afternoon of the 11th, we'll be sitting in a room. Oh, here we go. Sorry, it was too good to be true. I apologize. It seems to have dropped out again. I don't know what it is with the internet here. It seems to not be very robust. It keeps dropping. Bear with me. It'll hopefully come back, I hope. Can you still see me sharing the document? No, you probably can't, can you? I don't think. Okay. Sorry, I shall try and do that again. Here we go. So maybe I can get there. Okay. I'm going to click through to 75, which is annoying. Here we go.
Oh, hi, Dan, it's Julie at BCVS. Hi, okay. Yes, not too bad, thank you. I wondered whether you would be able to go into Becky Law's quarantine emails. Somebody's just sent her an email to them. I think it might be quarantine. It's from Ian Bond from Inspire. Inspire. Probably about 15 minutes ago. 19 minutes. Yeah. Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Bye. A lot of we can find it. You have to speak down, please. Trying to get our IT technical people to see if it's quarantine the folder. So they're going to have a look, see if they can, if it has gone into quarantine, and they can release it for us.
Okay, I'm struggling now with the. Okay, I'm just going to have to carry on, I think, without sharing the thing, which is not ideal, I know. Can you still hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so where was I? Yeah, so I was going through the various elements of the project initiation, wasn't I think? And I'd got to the point where we were talking about the program management of multiple projects and bringing them together and manage them as programs. And that's something which within Inspire, as I say, we are now doing, and it's working quite well. It's got its problems because it's new to us and we're finding, teething problems as we go. And I know some colleagues are finding it quite, how can I describe it? Onerous to have to kind of go through this process of attending, because we're holding the program management meetings once a month, every kind of at the first meeting of the beginning of the month, in the afternoon, and going through each of the programs and checking how the progress is against each project, within the programs. And some colleagues, I think, are kind of finding that quite onerous, as it were, and a bit of a kind of an additional drag on their time. But I think that they will hopefully find that overall it's actually quite an advantage, because effectively it's kind of allowing them to monitor and to control their projects more closely by doing it that way, having that kind of systematic approach. And I think Andrea and within Bassett Law is looking to try to do something comparable and to have a kind of an approach to not just project but also program management. So that's that. We covered that a little bit. We then talked about the project roles, and if you remember, there were 3 main project roles. Can anyone remember what they were in terms of any project? Who the 3 main functions or 3 main roles that you'll find for a project?
The manager and someone else.
Yes, the sponsor, the manager, and then it's the person who's like the service. Once the project's finished, somebody that you kind of hand the project over to ensure that because once a project's completed, it maybe not always, but it might become the new business as usual. Because we talked about the difference between what a project is and the difference between a project and business as usual. And one of the things that projects can be used to do is to move an organization from a current state to a new position through the process of going through the project, so that the new business as usual is different from what it was before you initiated the project. But it's important that you've got somebody who you can hand that over to actually then become the manager who's got the responsibility for ensuring that new business as usual and the kind of, if you like, the wins of the project aren't lost over time and that they're actually sustained. So that's key. So they're the 3 kind of core functions, I think, that within any project. And again, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about agile, Print2, or any of the different approaches to project management, they will all boil down to having a project sponsor, a project manager, and somebody who's responsible for ensuring that once the project's completed, the kind of project's wins are consolidated and the organization benefits from those successes.
That's got a specific name then, that role?
I think we're calling it the kind of within Inspire, we're calling that as the kind of the service manager, so it's kind of, it hands over to the service manager once the project sponsor and the project manager's finished. So it's there, but we're identifying them right at the start, at the beginning of the project, so that person knows that they will be handed the baton. And that means that they know they've got skin in the game, because again, what can sometimes happen is a manager doesn't take any interest, if you like, in the project until it's at the point when he or she's about to get it as a hot potato. And by that point, it's maybe 18 months later and a lot of water will have gone under the bridge. And what we're trying to do within Inspire is get that kind of the service inheritor is actually identified at the outset, so that, and they're being invited to these interminable, as I'm calling them, Wednesday afternoon that I've got to look forward to, project planning meetings that we're doing now, which at the program level, so that they are there with the project sponsor and the project manager, knowing that the baton will at some point be handed over to them. So it shouldn't come to them then as a surprise, because again, in the past, I don't know if that's something that I'm sure we all have had some experience of. I've sometimes been the lucky manager that's been the recipient of the baton, or sometimes I've been the one trying to pass the relay baton on. But either way, it's not great if you haven't had those communications properly beforehand, because neither the person that you're passing it on to, or if you're the one receiving it, is particularly won't like that if you haven't had the opportunity to have some preparation and planning and ability to pick that up. So we're trying to build that into what we do. And I think most approaches to project management will have those sort of 3 roles within them. They might have others, but those are the key ones. And then we talked a little bit about the different types of organizations that there are as well. And we basically organized them into, I think, 3 main types of organization. And there was one that we called kind of functional organizations, which we agreed most of our organizations were. Inspire is definitely one. I think Bassett Law CVS is one, where you tend to have a kind of a hierarchical structure with the things split into kind of departments based upon what the functions of the different departments happen to be. And then you have the kind that are that are kind of but not those ones, but actually they are matrix organizations, where you have actually got some approach to kind of like a project management approach, and you might have dotted lines of accountability between people because they've been pulled together to actually do particular projects. And it's a more flexible approach than the kind of strictly functional approach, because you have got dotted lines of accountability. And I suppose to a certain extent, Inspire and I would imagine Bassett Law have got bits of that matrix within them as well, because if you're a project manager, you often have responsibility for colleagues to do work on the project without necessarily being that person's actual line manager. And that's a kind of dotted line responsibility. And that tends to happen more when you increase the volume of project work within an organization. And then we also talked about the 3rd type, which is kind of project organizations. Can anyone remember what examples we gave of what might be a very pure project organization that only comes together as an organization to deliver a kind of one-off project, and then when it's finished they kind of disband? And anyone got an example of what one of those might be?
Would it be something maybe like a committee for like we have got Retford Charter Day in Retford? Then the committee for that just come together just for that, and then they all go and do the separate things after that. Is that sort of thing?
Yeah, that would be an example. Yeah, that would. But the actual if there's an organisation that did that, if you see what I mean, I don't know if that is then an example that they often use in the kind of literature is things like film production crews and so on, because they come together to make a TV program like Poldark or whatever, and they will all come together and they will be a team, and the camera crew will be the camera crew, and the sound will be the sound, and the editing will be the editing, etc. And even the actors will be the actors for that project. And while it's being made as Poldark, they'll all come together as a group, and they'll be, if it's a long running series like Poldark was, it'll probably be the same people that come together to make series 4 as were there at series 1, although there might be some changes to personnel. But once Poldark's decommissioned, all of those people that made Poldark in all of those different roles disband, don't they? And kind of, they will come together in a new configuration for the next production of whatever it is. And, there are strengths to that, because it means that you get people that are really excellent at their jobs and they can be really focused. But the downside is that you lose the kind of organizational knowledge of the production crew of Poldark can dissipate away when they disperse and then come back together for something else, which is why some people in the world of film think that the days, for example, of when the BBC used to commission and make its own things did mean that you might be working on many projects, but you were ultimately employed as a cameraman or camera person by the BBC, and it didn't matter whether you were shooting Daleks 1 minute or blooming Nationwide the next, you were going to be a camera person. And actually there's something to be said that can actually lead to more continuity and better outcomes rather than it all being done by, like it is currently, independent production companies that come together to make one particular program and then disband. Anyway, there we go. So that's that one. And moving on from that, we then also talked about the importance of the business case and why it's important to actually, at the beginning of a project, have some kind of project initiation that then sets out what it is that the project is trying to achieve, what kind of timescales it's going to achieve it in, and that also will have some kind of options appraisal, which would kind of say, don't do anything, do the project but 50%, or kind of, you know, a midway version, or do it 100% kind of thing. They tend to be the three main options appraisals that you'll find in any business case. And, you know, that the business case purpose is to go and actually go to whoever the key decision-making entity is, to actually give the green light to the go ahead of the project, and to determine whether or not the project is going to be, you know, at 100%, if you know what I mean, or if it's going to be at less than that, or if the option is that it's to not do it, then it won't get initiated at all, if that makes sense. But going through a formal project, actual project business case stage, which is a project initiation process where you have to produce some kind of document that states what the reasons for doing the project are to win the approval for the project, is a key part of all projects. And it's very helpful to do the next two stages if you've got a decent project case, because you're going to kind of regularly go back and refer to it, I think, throughout the life of the project. And it can stop things like project creep, where the project ends up doing things that it was never initially intended to actually do. And it can help that if you've actually clearly stated what the project's aims are. And again, in the project case, you'll also talk about what the key kind of deliverables of that project are, and who the key beneficiaries of the project are supposed to be, and sort of actually outline in the project brief some key kind of, you know, success indicators and kind of, you know, KPIs and success indicators. So and then we talked about the fact that every project has got a life cycle with a beginning, middle, and end. And as I say, I'm giving a very simplistic approach to that life cycle because I think it's sensible and easy, which is to think of projects as basically having three broad stages, which is this one that I'm talking about, the initiation stage, which is the pre-start of the project, but you have to do these things in order to make sure that any project is going to be successful. Then you've got the project delivery, or sorry, the project planning stage, where you go through and make sure you've planned it appropriately, and then you deliver the thing. And quite often when projects go wrong, it's because one or other of those stages has not been adequately thought about, gone through, and so on. So moving on from project initiation, then we talked about project planning, and this was Michael's session, wasn't it? I think the second session, moving on from me. And he talked about the fact that you need to develop the project management plan. And within a project management plan, there are then sub-plans that go to make up the main plan. And the sub-plans that go into make up that plan will be things like a communication plan for the project, having a risk management plan for the project where you've identified risks and you've taken actions to mitigate the risks, and you've looked at the likelihood and the impact of those. You then also may have a quality management sub-plan, and you may have something around procurement, and you may have something around the scope of the project, again, to stop the project creep happening, the dreaded creep. And you also will have something in there about the leadership of the project, and you'll have some ideas about teamwork. So, you know, in that final stage around teamwork and so on, you'll be talking about some of the kind of the kind of business gurus that there are, and around the kind of concepts of forming teams and the kind of life cycle that happens with teams, because, you know, there is something that normally happens with almost all all of teams when you look at them. Does anyone know, can you remember what those various steps were in the process of the kind of creation and the kind of coming to fruition and ripening of a successful team? There's a kind of a 4-word little summary of it. Okay, well, it's forming. So you form the team, then it's storming, because often just after forming any new team, people, have to find ways of working, and there'll often be a lot of conflict in that early stage. Then there's norming, where the kind of people start to learn to work together, the edges get knocked off, if so to speak, and people start to work more effectively as a team. And then lastly is performing, where everybody's kind of knows what their roles are within the team, everybody's personal relationships within the team are good, and everybody knows what's expected of them and why their role is really important, and how them doing a good job really contributes to their team players also being able to do a good job. And the key thing in a really good, highly performing team is that each member of the team cares about the fact that their contribution has a direct impact on the contribution of the other members of the team. And have you all experienced being in a high performing team? And would you agree with me, because I think it is, that is one of the good experiences of being at work, and can actually make going to work and being at work even fun, dare I say it, at times? It's actually quite a positive thing. Has anyone experienced that thing where you kind of are in a high performing team and you really know you're firing on all cylinders and kind of cooking on gas, and it's going very well? I'm seeing some skeptics.
Yeah, I have. It was some years ago, but and obviously what we're doing here, that's different. But yeah, I've worked as well. We're getting awards and things like that across the county. This was in South Yorkshire, and people came to us for advice and all this kind of thing. But then times changed and contracts changed, and it's not like that, which is why I'm here. So
No, absolutely.
But when
Nice.
people came to us and it felt great, and we were, bee's knees, and it takes a while to get there. But then you have to try and hang on to that, don't you? And then it starts to grow. You don't even notice it's eroding, but you kind of know who's got the best skills, to go to, and that kind of thing. So it's good when it works, but it's hard getting there.
Absolutely. It's really difficult to get there. I've only reached it a few times in my career, but you do know, it's a bit like kind of falling in love. You do know it when you do it, and it's not the same as not being in it, if you see what I mean. It does exist, and it is, when you reach it, it's kind of, you've reached it. But actually, you're also right that it's very difficult sometimes to kind of maintain that for all kinds of reasons. But I think the realization is that once you've lost one kind of highly performing team, is the opportunity to then go into another new team. And once you understand that there's this cycle with all teams, you can be more tolerant if you're in the kind of storming or the norming stage, because you do know that the performing stage will come once the edges get knocked off and so on. So yes, it's one of the, but it is true, once you've actually experienced that thing of being in a highly performing team and you've got your role and it's really working well, you want it again, don't you? Because it's actually great. It's actually a really good place to be. So Michael talked about that, talked about the whole kind of leadership and teamwork and some of the approaches. I think he would have probably touched on things like Maslow's hierarchy of need as well, and that kind of pyramid shape. And, can anyone remember what's right at the apex of the pyramid? Do you remember the 2-word term? It's kind of self-actualization, is where you kind of, the sweet spot where what you're doing at work is actually allowing you to be, you in full, and bringing everything that you have to the party and making a real contribution. So that's that one. And then there's project delivery, which was Nikki's session, which was just before Christmas, kind of towards the end of November. And she covered things like scheduling and resource organization. So that's actually down to our good old friend, the Gantt chart, and planning tasks against time, and doing that is really key to the delivery of the project. She also will have touched on things like conflict management, because again, throughout projects, there are going to be issues and times when there might be conflicts, because different pressures pull on a project, don't they? and you need to be able to, as a project manager, effectively resolve that. Then she will have touched on negotiation skills and negotiating, because again, when it comes to trying to resolve conflict, negotiation is one of the key attributes and tools that you as a project manager have in your kind of tool bag. And then talking about knowledge and information management to ensure that people know what's going on in the project, to know what the project is learning and lessons learned, and that those lessons learned are logged. And that's important. And we're going to touch on that later on today when we talk about what you need to do when you wrap up a project, because it's important to learn lessons so that you can then pass that on to the next project, because one finds often in working now that one project follows on the heels hotly of the next. So we need to try and do that. And last but not least, you will have covered things like the earned value approach. So how do we know whether or not the various elements of the project are actually good value for money and are giving us a good return? And there are some simple tools that allow us to do a quick and dirty analysis and establish whether what we're doing is actually good value for money or not. Is it washing its face? Is it covering its costs? And hopefully making a small, bottom line contribution. So they were the things I think that Nikki will have covered. So I can't easily move to the next slide. I know I could attempt to share again, but I'm conscious that if I try that, I suspect it's going to go horribly wrong. You haven't actually got it sent. I haven't managed to send it to you, have I? Because it didn't come through.
No.
What would be the best thing I could do? I'm trying to think of ways in which I could. Can I? I don't know if I can stick this in the chat. It's not. I don't know if that's possible.
You can try it. You definitely send it to the right email, didn't you? becky.law@bcvs.org.uk.
I'll just have a quick check to make sure. That's a good question. I think I did, but I will check. I'll read it back to you. Yeah, becky.law@bcvs.org.uk.
Yeah, that's the one. Okay.
So yeah, definitely sent it to the correct email address, which is good, but unfortunately you haven't got it, which is not so good. Okay, well, I'm going to move on to the next one anyway, which I know is tricky because you can't see this, but I will talk to it. And this is around change control. So one of the key things that makes a project be effective is being able to effectively manage the changes in a project. And this is something which I think, again, you have already covered, because I think it was part of Michael's process of looking at project planning. But I particularly think it's worth revising it, because I think it's a very key if I was to point at one of the key areas where projects often go wrong and fail, it's through the poor management of the change process. So it's one of the key areas where I think it's most important for effective project management, which is why I've picked on this one out of all of them to say let's really revisit it. So there are always going to be changes that impact a project throughout the course of a project's life cycle. So having to manage change is part of a project manager's life, that you just have to accept that there's going to be changes. So, and they can be basically small, obviously, or, quite large, and you need to be able to kind of characterize those, because you might need to treat them slightly differently. If it's a less important small change, then it doesn't require obviously as much time and thinking and resource as if it's a larger change. That's kind of goes without saying. Changes in the project are going to normally impact a number of different stakeholders and also members of the project team, because we talked about, again, you're thinking, aren't you, of this 50th anniversary for Bassett Law CVS coming up in 2023. And take, for example, if there was a change to the venue or the date or something like that, would be a large change, but failure to communicate that change both within the stakeholders linked to the project and with the internal colleagues involved in the delivery of the project would cause, you don't need me to tell you, but it would cause major issues and major problems. But it's good to think about that, because it's those sorts of practical issues that demonstrate why it's so important to ensure that the change process and changes to projects are effectively managed, because failure to do it can cause massive derailment of projects. In fact, they're complete failure. So when you do changes, you need to carefully consider, and it may involve an element of consultation, and you definitely need to make sure that they are communicated properly. So if there's going to be a change, somebody needs to actually formally, I would suggest, bring that change to the project manager and to the kind of project management team in order to actually bring about the change. It should not be possible for somebody within the project team, or a stakeholder for that matter, to just do a change and think that's okay. Because if that is how the project is being quote unquote managed, and people just make changes kind of willy-nilly without feeling that they need to seek permission for those changes up front, then the project will be impossible to manage, won't it? It will become unwieldy and unworkable. So there has to be I do think for change management, there has to be a fairly formal approach to actually initiating changes to the project. And there probably will need to be, as it says here, some form of consultation about whether or not the project is actually, proposal is actually a good idea or not. So, like we talked about the options appraisal for the project as a whole being part of what's in the business case for the project as a whole, in a way, each project change is almost like a mini project business case. If that makes it, needs to go through almost like a mini version of what you do for the project as a whole. Somebody has to actually come with that change proposal, explaining why the change is worthwhile and looking at the options. And I would always again say the three main options to look at are: don't do the change, do the change but kind of at 50%, or do the change at 100%, and see what the differences are of each of those. And if you've had an opportunity to consult and discuss that, then you can make the decision either not to do the change, which would be don't implement it, or do it but less, or do it full Monty. And I think that's an important set of considerations you need to go through. You might have examples, and this is an opportunity for you to think about your own experience both now and in the future, perhaps, where changes have been made but not appropriately communicated. And it might be, I've got my one where you might change the date or the venue for this event for the 50th anniversary, where I can just imagine what that would be like and how that might go wrong. Can anyone come up with any ones that you've come across where there's been changes, either small or large, that have kind of effectively been poorly communicated and then led to kind of lots of trouble at mill and a lot of remedial to put it right?
Not happened to me before, but I have had a friend tell me once that she was told the meeting was online, and then it got changed to being in person, and no one told her it was in person. So she was waiting on an online Zoom thing, and no one was there. It didn't happen to me, but it happened to a friend of mine.
Yeah, and that's not good, is it? And that's a waste of their time. That's a good example, and it demonstrates how it can be very wasteful of time. Any other examples of changes that haven't been very well communicated that have caused negative impact to a project?
Suppose if anyone got some new members of staff or something and didn't tell everybody that person had left, or they didn't know that someone had left. Maybe.
Yeah, that can cause all kinds of difficulties and can cause lots and lots of remedial changes and kind of expense and difficulties. I'm trying to think of an example for me. I think I've had one where I was on a project where I was doing retail training in Leeds, and we were based in a actually a shop unit in the main shopping centre in the centre of Leeds, and we were meant to be working with the company that owned the shopping centre to do training for their sort of centre staff, the kind of security staff that actually ran the centre itself rather than the retail units within. And something happened and we had to change the date of that to another date, and we didn't properly communicate it, and the actual people turned up at the unit where we were meant to be operating from, and they were waiting and queuing to come in, and there was nobody to let them in, and it really damaged our reputation with the company that actually owned the very unit that we were kind of leasing, which when it came to renegotiating the value of the lease and all kinds, it was a very very negative set of things flowed from that. So yeah, I mean there's been a few examples where, sorry, did I blip out then for a bit? Can you hear me okay? Sorry.
Sorry, and I think it's our end this time.
Okay, sorry. Can you hear me okay at all? Hello?
Hope we
I'm
can.
just having a look to see if we've got a
Okay.
better signal on a different
Sorry, thank you.
It's the one down here. That is
an
the
AP
one.
down there.
No, other one.
Okay.
It's
Well,
connected.
they're both saying the same signal strength anyway, Julie, so
Mm.
I wouldn't bother swapping.
Yeah.
Just the two. Better we can
So in order to kind of do them, whether you go the full Monty with the kind of very, as I say, kind of very documented approach, which is Prince2, or a lighter touch, at the very minimum level, when you're doing changes within a project, because of what can go wrong if you don't do it appropriately, is I think in project management, you need to have some kind of change log where you actually log all the changes that are being requested. And you actually need to, in the log, say what the actual specifics of the change are. And there needs to be a kind of a mini, like I say, business case for that change that needs to say why it's worthwhile making the change. Because why would you want to do a change if there's not a real reason for doing it? That's just not appropriate. And then there needs to actually be an approval that's clear. And then once the change has been approved, then, as we've just been mentioning, the key to it is communicating that change to all the stakeholders, both internal and external, so that everybody knows that that's the new. Because basically, what you're doing by changing is now that's the new normal. It's you've actually made a difference happen, and you need to be able to communicate that appropriately. So I think if you take nothing else from these 4 sessions, but just that the importance of how to manage change processes within project management, then that will be a very key thing for you to have remembered, because that's the key, I think, to successful project management. If you can log all of the changes and you can actually ensure that the changes are going to be beneficial, and if they're not, frankly, then you don't give them approval, do you? You don't make a change unless it's at least going to be better than not making the change. So it needs to each change needs to have some case to prove that it's going to be better than not doing it. And then if it has been agreed that it's better, then you need to communicate that change. So next thing is about reporting on stages. Again, I'd like to show you the reporting on stages slide, but I can't. I apologize, because I think if I did, the thing would fall over again. I don't know why, but the internet link here isn't strong enough. I'm in the Eastbourne house. I'm actually in one of our Inspire offices. It ought to be fine, but for whatever reason, it seems to not be. But reporting on stages, how do you think you should report on the completion of a stage of a project before moving on? What do you think might be some of the ways you might do that? You know, as project managers, what would you do? You've kind of finished one chunk of the project. Maybe you've finished the, let's say, you know, the project initiation stage. You're about to move into the planning stage. What would you do to kind of make that transition between those two stages? What do you think might be some of the things you'd do?
You'd need to make sure and kind of recap that you'd covered everything off in your previous stage.
Absolutely,
and then
yeah.
kind of, yeah, sort of draw a line under that and then communicate that to everybody. Maybe if you'd have to report to your board, your trustees, or
Yeah.
depending on what stage you're at, or then if you need to report into funders at all.
Absolutely, there could be key external stakeholders. There probably will be a project kind of board that, you know, because that will be back at the original initiation, that will be the board that will have taken the decision either to go ahead with the project or not. They've given the green light. You're now making the transition from finishing the, if you like, initiation stage of the project and moving into formal planning. So you need them to kind of know. And I think you're absolutely right, doing it formally, getting them to kind of minute it and record it so that they know that they've actually given approval. And the thing you said earlier as well about ensuring that all the elements of the previous stage have completed before you move to the next stage is also important as well. So how do you think that links to what we've just been talking about in terms of change management? Can you see how moving from one stage of a project to the next is a form of change management, in fact? Do you see what I mean? It's a type of change, isn't it? You're kind of requesting as a project manager the change in the project to go from that stage to the next, so that you're the one is instigating a change, and therefore you need to go through the same processes of getting the board approval, getting it signed off, putting it in the log again as a change request, getting it logged and dated, and then being able to implement it going forward. And what do you think might be some of the things that can commonly go wrong with this approach? Where do you think people make mistakes when it comes to going from the one stage of a project to the next? What do you think people might do wrong, project managers might do wrong typically?
Maybe miss out some of the key stages that were originally agreed as part of the project.
Yeah, they can do that. They can cut corners and miss out some of the key elements, so they can actually initiate a kind of a stage change too early when they haven't really finished the stage that they're in. They kind of are anxious to kind of progress more quickly than, you know, and they haven't actually done all of the elements they needed to do within the stage that they're at. That's true, and that does happen, and that can then cause ongoing difficulties, because somebody will go 3/4 of the way through a project and then go, why are we doing this? And then they go, well, let's go back and look and see what it said in the original project brief about why we're doing this. And the project brief hasn't been fully completed because that stage of initiation got skimped on because the project manager wanted to kind of move to project planning and project delivery really quickly. Because again, in this country, we are a very short-term kind of economy and way of operating. Different countries and different approaches and different economies have their own kind of culture, and the UK culture is one of kind of, you know, do it now. 5 years is an eternity. A year is a long time. You know, a few months is you know. So there's a tendency, and project managers are not immune from this, to kind of try to rush through things quicker than they should be. And if you haven't done everything properly in the stage that you're about to finish, then it will come back and bite you, and it will haunt you. It will cause a problem. And how might you overcome some of those issues? What you might do as a project manager to try to stop the worst of those issues biting you?
Having some kind of like an action plan or sort of a detailed document of all the different stages.
Absolutely. Having a good plan, and that would be part of your kind of project plan that would talk about what the stages are of the project, and the project life cycle is really useful. And I also think it's about resisting those pressures to do changes unless the changes are ready and warranted and are going to make a material beneficial difference. So you as the project manager need to kind of not be afraid to say no, basically, because there can be a tendency, and I'm guilty of this, to say yes to things and then make changes and then not record them properly, not communicate them effectively, move the project on swiftly because you think you're making good progress, but actually you've missed some of the key steps, and then it all can come slightly unwound, so to speak. And then you end up wasting more time doing a remedial fix than you would have done if you did it right in the first place. Because my experience of when things go wrong is it takes longer, more time to fix things that have gone wrong. Last one before the break. So we're on about schedule now. Is around project closure, and I just want to talk a bit about the importance of project closure, because again, I mentioned just a minute ago about the short-term nature of our business approach and how we are in this country. I also have talked about how projects often come thick and swift in that they follow close on each other's heels. So there is often a tendency when one project is finishing to kind of go, right, that's boring, that's done that now, don't want to think about it anymore, and move on to the next thing. But the danger of doing that is that you miss out on learning some of the key lessons, which if you did do the project closure correctly, would allow you to in fact learn from your practice of having done that previous project, which will inform, if you do it formally, the future projects and make them more successful. So here are some of my ideas about what I think some of the elements within a project closure process ought to be. You need to do some kind of final project report. And that doesn't have to be War and Peace, because people aren't going to spend a long time reading it. But it needs to be a short and pithy summary of what the key things that the project was set out to do were and how has it done it. So the kinds of things you want to put into this are lessons learned. So what lessons have been learned as a result of implementing the project? What things will be done differently in the future as a result? There'll be also the issues log. Risks are things that you are anticipating that will happen and that you then put in place things to try to mitigate them. Issues are things that have happened, so it's too late. It's no longer a risk, it's actually something's gone wrong, and you should also have a log, and you should be writing down what those issues are, and what has happened as a result of those issues and how you've overcome them. And then you need to also, in that final project report, talk about, did the project meet the expectations of the key stakeholders? Did the project successfully deliver all of the deliverables? Because back in the original business case, remember, there will be a set of deliverables that this project is going to do, because the world will be a different place once you've done the project compared to what it was before you did the project. So you need to actually be able to outline, did it deliver those things it said it was going to deliver? The next one is, did it do them on time? Because a project is a change process against time, and did it do it on time? And if not, why not? And then we're back to the lessons learned. Did it do it on budget? So because again, a project will have a dedicated resource allocated to it. Did the project achieve its objectives within that financial and resource envelope, or did it actually end up costing more? And again, that will be reflected again in the lessons learned. Did it deliver within the acceptable quality parameters? Because again, as part of the project plan, the project management plan, one of the subsections is a quality plan, where you will have set out what your kind of quality parameters are. Because it's no good just having a deliverable if you don't say how good quality the deliverable is. And you need to understand that quality means that it's fit for purpose, because if your purpose is to kind of do something that's good enough, then you don't need it to be better than that. So take an example that you're going to be working on for your launch event. If, I don't know, let's say if the catering needs to be kind of what you would expect to get for kind of, let's say, £10 a head, then you're not going to expect, I don't know, suckling pig or the vegan equivalent. You've got to but if the expenditure on that launch event for the thing is £10 a head, but if that's what everybody's expecting and it meets everybody's actual requirements, then that means it's high quality, because quality is, it means that the quality is good enough for doing it to meet the requirements of the project. So, because you can always put more quality to anything if kind of time and money is no object, but time and money is an object. So the purpose of project quality is to come up with a plan for managing the quality to make sure that the quality level is appropriate for the resources and the project you've got in hand. And you will need to decide for something like your launch event, those parameters. Sometimes it doesn't even get stated, you know what I mean? But you'll need to decide what venue, what kind of, how much per head, what the quality of the experience is going to be for those people that come to the event and what they're going to get for it. You need to have that in your mind and then judge whether it was met or not. And then last but not least, you need to decide whether the project, as part of the closure kind of report, did it ultimately deliver the original business case objectives for the project? And if you can answer genuinely that it did, then I think you can genuinely say that project was a success. And can you see why having that kind of more formal approach to bringing a project to a conclusion can be a really useful thing, because you can see how it will inform projects going forward. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, my suggestion is, because I think we've done a lot of I've taken you through a lot of them. We've had a few glitches and things. It's now coming up for about 25 minutes past 2. Shall we break until about, shall we say, let me think, what would be reasonable? About 22. Does that seem like a reasonable break to give ourselves a chance to make a kind of comfort break, have a drink, etc. And then when we come back, we'll be moving on to doing the written question, which I will try again to share my screen, because I don't think it's going to be easy for me just to tell you what that is. I think you need to be able to see it so you can then have it in front of you, and hopefully it will stay there without going blippity blip and not staying on the screen. So if we break now at kind of 25 past and come back at 22, which gives us, I think if I've done that correctly in my brain, that's about 15 minutes to have a quick break and a tea and a thing. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, that's good, that's great.
Thank you all. Is it going okay? Do you think, covered the key bits of what you covered in the previous 3 sessions reasonably? Are there any bits that anyone would like to go over that I haven't? Because I can adjust what we do after the break if you would like. No, okay, I'll take that broadly online then. That's good, and I shall see you in about 15 minutes, and have an enjoyable break. Thank you, and apologies for the IT glitch. I don't know what's going wrong, but the internet connection is just, the internet fairies are not doing well for me, I'm afraid.
Fine, see you shortly.
Thank you. Take care. Camera, that's a very sensible idea, because it's a question of when it's going to go beep, 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 and then disappear. So it's a question of when, not if. So that's good. But if I hope I've kept this relatively open as a kind of a, see, it's gone. I knew it would, and I was right.
Have you come through?
No. It's fine, took a picture of that.
I won't try and restore it all then because it doesn't work. I will just admit defeat, and I will continue as we were doing before without the aid of sharing the screen, because obviously it was stable when I wasn't trying to share the screen, at least, wasn't it? It didn't throw us off the internet, thankfully. So there are two elements to the question, which is what have you learned about project management over the last 3 sessions? So I don't want you to kind of do it, but just to kind of summarize, you can write it in note form. It doesn't, it's not an English test. This is just a kind of to see for yourselves really what you can recall and what you've learned and what you've gained from the last 3 sessions. And then the kind of key bit to this as well is, and how do you think you might be able to apply that in your work? And you've got the example of the 50th anniversary, but I'm sure others of you, I know that Stephanie, for example, and others are involved in a number of projects as well at the moment. And how can hopefully what you've learned through the 3 sessions that myself, Nikki, and Michael have done can hopefully actually practically help you to do your work, and how you might apply it. And then after that we'll have a quick discussion, and then we'll kind of wrap things up, if that's okay. Does that seem reasonable? And while you're doing that, we don't need to necessarily, we can do that kind of, I can, like we did during the break, if that makes sense. We can turn the camera off and the thing off while you have the 30-minute go at doing that, if that's okay. So it's now 3:45. I think if we kind of come back at 3:15, we can then have a final plenary session and wrap up things before 3:30. Does that seem like a good plan?
Yep.
Would anyone like me to just go over the questions that I'm asking again? Would that be helpful, given that I haven't been able to successfully put it on the screen for you?
No, we've actually pictures, so we've written it down.
Okay, so everyone's got it. That's good. Are there any questions that you'd like to ask me before I ask you to have a go at doing that? If you could do it electronically, so it's actually in a format that you can send it to us, that would be helpful, simply because it's good to be able to actually see what you've done. But if you write it but then scan it, that's absolutely fine. I just think it'd be good to have, an e-version of it so we can see it and you can send it to us and we can have a look, because I think it could be quite a useful record of what you've learned from the 3 sessions, and also how you will hopefully apply what you've learned to your practice. That would be useful to see your reflections on that. Is that okay? Does everyone kind of know what it is I'm asking? Is that fine? Does that seem reasonable? So shall we meet again at 15:15, if that's okay? And I look forward to seeing you then.
We're doing this individually, Ian, or can we do it as a group?
You'd like to do it as a group, I have no problem with that whatsoever. If it's going to be easier for you to discuss it and do it as either small groups or a one big group, or however you want to do it, the aim of this is not to get what's the word for it? It's not to catch anyone out and to see. I don't want lots of individual things from you. It's not like we're not scoring it. We're not going to kind of mark it like it's school. The aim of it is to just allow you to have the opportunity to think about what you've learned, recap it, and sometimes just writing it down and then writing down how you might apply it can help, I think, consolidate what you've learned, rather than what can sometimes happen with the discussions and me talking to you as well, is that it sometimes can have a tendency just to be a lot of information coming one way, and that's not always as healthy as it could be. So I'm hoping this will give you a chance to go back over and think about what you've covered. And yeah, so happy for you to do that in small groups, or even as one big group, or as individuals if you feel more comfortable, whichever you're happiest with. I'm very relaxed about that.
Thank you.
Fab, and I'll see you at 15:15. That'll be great. Thank you. Take care. I'll just put the camera and mic off again. Here we go. I can't do that, of course, because I've lost my mouse because it's no longer doing that. Separate head, that's good. Let's see it. So I hope that was helpful. As I say, if you can ping them to me, that would be really helpful, because I just think it'd be useful to see your responses. If you don't mind, that would be good. And
To try and share it now, Ian, so you can, because we put it, you've done it in a Word doc, we can try and share it now if you want to have a look.
yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, thank you.
You might
Whoops.
need to stop sharing, or I'm going to see if it will let me do it.
I'll stop sharing. Hang on. Hang on. I'll stop sharing. There you go. Yeah, now I can see it. I'm looking. It's good. Yeah, I'm reading it through.
Do bottom left, right, the bottom left.
Where?
Right, bottom right.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, it's moving out.
Oh, that's better. Thank you.
Too big now, hang on.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. I can see that. Thank you.
It's a guy, cancer person, Mr. Cancer, Richard Cancer or something.
Yeah. I think that last bullet point about Gantt charts is really true, because it can be a right pain filling them in, especially at the start of a project plan. To have to complete all the tasks and put them against time is in itself time consuming. But I think as project managers, we need to do that and try and do that as comprehensively as we can in that project planning stage, and then go to the project delivery. Because I don't know about you, but I've done projects, frankly, where I've been delivering the blooming thing, and then I've gone, oh yeah, maybe I need to do a Gantt chart now. And that's never the right way round. I mean, I know we often do that because that's the life we lead, really. But in an ideal world, it's much better to try to plan it as comprehensively as you can before going ahead with the delivery. Because whenever the projects have gone wrong for me, which they have quite often, it's been my fault, because often I've not put the time in to plan them properly at the start. So that's really good. Yeah, I like Rachel's point. Yeah. Yeah, I like Julie's as well. That makes sense. Yeah, I like Steph's thing. Yeah, putting in the project change approach right from the start is a definite plan. Yeah, communication through the change management and having a kind of a stakeholder communication plan is a really good idea, and identifying who your internal and external stakeholders for a project are, so that you know that and put that into your project management plan as part of your communications plan. That's a really sensible thing to do.
I've just done my diploma, so level 7 diploma in PR, and we use Power Matrix model for that. Working for stakeholders to who's the most interested with the least power, who's the most powerful with the least interest, and that works well for anything, including this sort of thing.
I think that's a really good idea. Yeah, and if you did that and put that power matrix, kind of like a Boston matrix with power versus interest for the different stakeholders, that's a good way of yes, sorting them. And that could be then part of your kind of stakeholder plan, because you want to put most of your investment in hopefully the high interest, high power people. You need to kind of make absolutely sure they know everything, and you need to do less investment with the low power, low interest stakeholders, and you need to know who they are, because otherwise you can get, sometimes with project communications plans, sometimes, and I've done a really detailed communication with someone who frankly didn't need to know, and it wasn't going to, they weren't that interested. And you've wasted a lot of effort
Marketing it to people that aren't even going to have an influence on your project.
Absolutely. So I think that's a really sensible, nice, quick and easy bit of planning. And I think putting that into your communications plan, that then becomes part of your wider project plan, because your project plan is not one, how can I put it? It's not one behemoth, massive thing. It's actually made up of a lot of little sub plans. So it's like a communications plan. There's a resource allocation plan. There's your Gantt charts with your timescales and your tasks. And, pulling those things together becomes the project plan. And the key to an effective project plan is if you do it and think of it as something that then just you do it and it lives on either on a computer or on a shelf but never gets referred to, that's not an effective project plan. Any project plan is only as effective as the use you as project managers make of it. And I would argue it needs to, if it's not well thumbed either physically or electronically, if you know what I mean, if you're not constantly revisiting it and adding to it and adjusting it, then it's not an effective project management plan. In fact, it's not a project management plan because they are fluid working documents. Does that make sense? You're not going to freeze it in aspect, because like your thing with the Boston Matrix for the stakeholders, people change as well, don't they? What's true at the start may not be true 6 months in. So you need to keep revisiting these things. So that's really good. The end of project. Yeah. I think end of project, again, just like at the front end, if you don't spend the time doing the Gantt charts and the planning, even though it's time consuming, then you will come to regret it. Similarly, if you don't properly write, it doesn't have to be War and Peace, but a reasonably comprehensive end of project plan to close that, like a project closure plan that includes some of those things I talked about when I went through the slide, which are, what has it met its deliverables? Did it reach the quality? Did it do it on time? Did it do it within budget? Those things and some of the lessons learned are absolutely key, because then you won't make some of the same mistakes again, because we do make mistakes making projects, things go wrong, but it's fine as long as we learn from our mistakes, because that's the way we learn, isn't it? Is by doing things and it going slightly wrong, and then we go, well, let's do it slightly differently and it will be a better outcome. So that's good. Yeah, the change log changes are one of the things that are a slippery slope. If not managed effectively, changes can undermine and derail a project. Yes, I think having consistency when it comes to the paper. I've mentioned throughout this how Inspire is in the process of trying to do this, and we are now using the same paperwork throughout all of our different projects. So that's good. Yes, scope creep. Yes, need to weigh up additional ideas and make sure that it's actually going to make a contribution to the ultimate business case. Because if not, then it still may be a good idea and one to capture, but it probably is a separate project. It probably requires its own project rather than adding it to an existing project, which can then cause all kinds of difficulties going forward. And then accountability to others with all the stakeholders. Absolutely. And I think, if I can, another one, I mean, it's communication. The more effectively as project managers you can ensure that your key stakeholders and internal teams are kept informed of the project regularly, which is why, again, this quite mechanical but monthly thing that we're doing as Inspire, where we go through each of the projects we have across the organization, and each project manager has a kind of 5-10 minutes where the spotlight is on him or her, I think is a really good practice going forward. Where are we? How much resource is available? What quality can you get from that resource, and whether it is good enough? Funders, you get told there is £50,000 for a project. You're not able to make the financial requirement. So for us, it's getting the budget and accessing the quality element to the fund available. Absolutely, because in the world of externally funded projects, often you're not in control of what the budget's going to be. What I would again say, it's back to that point I was making about quality, and quality is being, if you like, good enough. You can't expect, on a £50,000 project where you've got maybe, 100 beneficiaries, you need to work out roughly then what that spend is per head, and then what you're talking about. And it's not going to be Rolls Royce for that kind of money. It's going to be and as long as you make sure that what you're doing for the money is good enough. The danger is that often I think organizations try to deliver kind of like a Rolls Royce outcome on a Ford Fiesta amount of money, and then it goes wrong and people can get disappointed. Whereas if you try to fit the outcome to the money, it can work quite well. So in conclusion, we've covered then what you've learned from that, which is really helpful. So you've kind of covered the answer, like what you've learned from new approaches to project management. And I think that's really good. And you've talked about how you can apply them as well. So that's really helpful. Thank you for that. And one of the things I'll just ask you to talk to each other about, and you can feed back to myself and Andrea when we've finished, not just today, but in the next few days or even a few weeks' time, is what follow-on materials, what other kind of ongoing support around project management do you think you would like to build on these 4 sessions? Because sometimes, again, with these kinds of things, you kind of get marched up to the hill or marched halfway up the hill, but if you're just left there, it's not always it's not always easy, is it, when you're very busy people, to actually take what you've learned and apply it. Sometimes maybe all you'd need is a half an hour chat or something to kind of help you kind of run an idea past somebody. And I think we need to have some kind of after sales service available, if that makes sense. And I haven't thought it through, and there isn't any budget for it, but I still think it's actually something that's needed. So I think it would be a good, anyway, but if you can think about what, sorry.
Like a checklist so that you don't forget different elements that you might want to bring into what you're doing. Because if it's something that we kind of do it, but perhaps haphazardly. So if it was a list of, in your new project, have you thought about, all these different aspects, then you can make sure that you've got the right things in place. That'd help me anyway.
That's a really good idea. I like that. Kind of a simple. So for each of the 3 main project cycle stages, initiation, planning, and delivery, you could have like a kind of a simple like checklist, like aid memoir of things you could, and you wouldn't necessarily have to do everything for every project depending on the scale and size, but at least it would give you something to make sure you got like a checklist. That would be helpful, wouldn't it? I think. Yeah, that's a really good suggestion. So we're right there now. So I think we're just about coming to past. So all it remains for me to do is just to thank you very much indeed for bearing with. Apologies for the quality of the internet connection today, which has been frankly lousy. I apologise. I hoped it would be better, but for whatever reason, I don't know. I'm at work. I'm in an office. It should be good, but these are the vagaries of whatever. I don't know why Eastbourne House hasn't got the internet connectivity, but it was working, and then it just kept dropping, didn't it? Just obviously it's just blipping out. So I apologise, but thank you for your attendance. I hope you found this helpful, and as I say, I hope it's not just the one-off, but actually the start of something that, because I know we want to try to co-produce this, working with you, so that we end up with something tailored for the 3rd sector and partners, and it's actually project management for people working in the 3rd sectors, particularly in the kind of CVS and related disciplines, because there's a lot of organizations out there, and I don't know that there's that much in the way of project management support for colleagues, and it's a skill set that's increasingly needed, isn't it? I think, because most things are now projects of one kind or another, funded or otherwise. So but thank you for being a really good group. Thanks for your contributions. I know Nikki and Michael both enjoyed sort of delivering and working with you as well. So I hope it's been useful. I hope that you've learned a lot. And I hope, as I say, it's not a one-off, and that we follow up with this as well, and that there's other things that come out of it moving forward, so we can continue to support each other with our doing effective project management and delivery.
Thank you, Ian.
No, thank you. That's been good. Thank you very much. Take care and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you much for your time and attention. Hope you've enjoyed that, and thanks for doing such a really good comprehensive list of in the written exercise. That was really good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Ian, I just wondered, because I know we'll put the recordings up as well.
Yeah.
Wonder if we could get the slides at some
Yeah, sure.
point, even just for this.
Yeah, I could just add them on to edit video, even if I can't slot them in the right places. I could upload the slide to the web page you've made on this or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know what the best way to do that is. I'll try and do it when I'm somewhere where I can talk to maybe an IT person who's better than me, and then they may be able to be away.
We transfer something like that.
Yes, yeah, something like that would be good, so that you can actually get, because it's quite a big file, isn't it? So you can get them all. But we've got it all saved. It's not only saved on my Q drive, but it's also on we're on a shared drive as well with. So maybe that's another thing. We could actually make you have access to that SharePoint, perhaps. I don't know, because then you could just go through Office 365 and get it, because it's on the cloud then, isn't it? I think. I don't know. Anyway, but we'll find a way to make sure you've definitely got all the materials. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. No, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks very much for your attention, and I hope it's been helpful. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.